What's going on, everybody? Welcome in
Hi,
tonight.
everyone.
Thank you for hanging out with us tonight for our interview with David Pepose, writer of Scout's Honor, Spencer and Locke, many more. How are you doing tonight, Caroline?
Good. Hanging out. Got my cat in the background, just chilling.
Yeah. So, without further ado, we have the 3-time Ringo Award nominated comic writer of Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel, Grand Theft Astro, The OZ, Scout's Honor, and Roxy Rewind, David Pepose.
Hi. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the show tonight. And and thank you for the wonderful introduction, listing all of my stuff. I'm excited.
I might have just found that right on your Twitter.
But no, I'm really excited to be on the show, excited to talk all these books with you, excited to talk comics in general. But thank you guys so much for the wonderful and gracious invite.
And we're very appreciative of you coming on and talk to us. We're both big fans of Scout's Honor. That's how I got introduced to your work. I've since ordered some of the other books. They're still on their way. So I'm looking forward to reading more of them. So I guess to get us kicked off here, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the comics industry.
Yeah. So I came by it. I'm a third generation comics reader. My mother was a comics fan. My grandfather was a comics fan. So I remember getting a copy of Amazing Spider-Man 347 when I was like 5 or 6. And it was Spider-Man versus Venom just before they wind up going on the island together. And it blew my mind. I loved the action. I loved the art. I loved, Peter Parker has always been one of my favorite characters in fiction. And, seeing all that, I got a handful of other Marvel books at the time. And I distinctly remember getting Infinity War #2. That was sort of my second batch of comics my parents ever got me. And I realized all these characters knew each other. And that just really kind of set me up for life. It was a lifelong habit. I kind of zigzagged my way into comics. I worked, I interned at DC Comics in college. I worked on books like Batman R.I.P., Final Crisis, Green Lantern Secret Origins. But that was during the recession, so there were no jobs. I wound up working, I worked at a newspaper. I covered crime and state politics. And then meanwhile, I moonlit as the reviews editor at Newsarama for over a decade. And it wasn't until, I was kind of feeling particularly restless. I had taken a publicity job in New York, working for CBS television. And it was not very creatively fulfilling. And so I kind of started writing short scripts just to kind of pass the time. And I said, this is fun. Maybe I'll write like a full-length script. And then I said, I really like that first issue I wrote. I'm going to write an outline. And I was like, that's fun. Maybe I'll ask an artist actually to draw this, see how it feels. And I was like, that was fun. Maybe I'll just pitch this around. No way anything's going to happen. And that's how my first book, Spencer and Locke, got sold. That was that script. And since that book came out and sort of the dust settled and I was like, okay, I still have a career. People seem to like this book. I've been writing ever since. And it's been such a wonderful privilege to be able to work in this industry. I've always, I'm the oldest of 4. My younger siblings are triplets, and I've got about a decade on them. And I always ask them, what's your astronaut job? And writing comics is mine. And it's the best job in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And so I'm excited to, have continued to build on that foundation that Spencer and Locke built with Going to the Chapel, the OZ, Scout's Honor, and more stuff coming down the pike. It's just the best job in the world.
Awesome. We got some fans in the chat. It looks like Wesley's comic collection.
Oh, thanks, Wesley.
Travel and Root Beer. Lewis, he makes some cool clay sculptures.
Nice.
Got to get him make a Scout's Honor one or something.
Yeah.
He said he meant to say Scout's Honor there, but the Nelson variant from Hive Comics, which I didn't even know about.
I didn't know about that. I'll have to look that up.
Interesting.
That's wild. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, a lot more people joining. So shout out to everyone that's in there watching. No Good Comics, K Titus, Tapia's Family Unlimited Comics, Ace.
Hey,
I would assume so.
You know who that is?
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
How you doing? Thanks so much for joining the show.
That's great. Love it.
All right. So, how did you come up with the idea for Scout's Honor, and like, how long were you working on it before you were able to get it made?
So, most of my comics, it's like a long time coming. This was not one of them. This was kind of this. I usually have a pretty long list of like to-do list of what I want to write, and this is I'm planning like 8 books in the future, thinking like, okay, I want to have this for my convention set up next year. But Aftershock's a little bit of a different animal. This is going to be a little bit inside baseball, so I apologize if I lose anybody in the weeds. But there's really kind of like 2 different ways to pitch creator-owned comics. There's what I call like the image model, where you're responsible for bringing your whole team together. You've usually put together at least 1 issue, and then you shop it around to various publishers. So Image, Action Lab, Scout Comics, to name a few. And it's thumbs up or thumbs down. It's high risk, high reward.
Okay.
There are other places like Aftershock or Boom where they want to be a little bit more hands-on with the development. And so they'll batch make your team for you. They'll actually do the financing up front. They'll, I'll get a page rate, which is new and different and nice. So what happens with those publishers is they don't really want a whole lot ready just yet. They want to be kind of able to help go back and forth with you a little bit. So with Aftershock, what I had done was I've known Aftershock for a while. Mike Martz, who's the editor-in-chief, he was the Batman editor when I was at DC.
Oh.
So, he was the editor on Batman R.I.P. So I've known Mike since I was in college. So that's 13 years now. Wow.
Good connection to have.
So when Aftershock was founded and Mike had announced that he was editor-in-chief, I knew this was a place that I wanted to work. And so I've been kind of knocking on Aftershock's door for a long time. I did from the moment that Spencer and Locke first came out. Thank you so much, Comics of the Mind. That's very nice of you to say. And it took a while to find like the right concept. And what happened was I had all these concepts that I had spent so much time developing. And then Scout's Honor was kind of the one that I had just come up with. I really had done very little development on it. But I said, you know what? I've got 5 log lines. I'm going to add on like an even 6th. Okay. And of course, a month or so later, I get an email back from Aftershock being like, that's Scout's Honor. Yeah, we'd love to see more about that. And I was like, oh, crap. Okay, I got to write an outline for this. And so it's probably one of the faster outlines that I've put together. Usually that process takes a long time. Where that idea came from, there are a couple different sources that all kind of come together for me. Part of it was I was watching a show called The Path on Hulu, starring Aaron Paul. It's a story.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, kind of like a Scientology style cult. And what happens to Aaron Paul's character when he decides he's disillusioned with the cult and wants to leave. So it's what happens to him, what happens to his family, what happens to kind of the cult's second in command, who's really kind of running things behind the scenes while their sort of prophet messiah figure is secretly in his deathbed. And I remember watching that and thinking, like, what's the weirdest thing that a cult could use as its Bible? And when I thought of a Boy Scout manual, a lot of things started clicking very quickly. But as the story developed and as I was working on the outline and as, especially when Aftershock said, yeah, we want to go for that, there were certain mutations that kind of happened with the story. For example, our lead character, Kit, and, if you haven't read the first issue yet, sorry guys, spoilers, but it's
spoil away a little bit.
This is the story of a post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult. They've risen from the ashes of a nuclear war. Their Bible is an old boy Scout manual. And we jump a couple hundred years into the future, and our main character is Kit, who's a young initiate, kind of the best of the Ranger Scouts of America, as they try to bring law and order to the irradiated Colorado Badlands. There's a twist. This is a very patriarchal, hyper-masculine cult. They only let men serve. And so Kit has had to conceal her identity as a woman in order to pursue her calling as a Ranger Scout. And she's going to find out that the cult has a pretty dark secret. And we're going to find her kind of losing her religion as she embarks in a quest for the truth. And some of that came from, I had not had the idea of Kit being a woman when I first pitched this to Aftershock. They said, yeah, post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult. That sounds like fun. We'd love to hear more. And I immediately thought, oh, crap. It's a Boy Scout cult. Like, how am I going to make this work? This was 2019 when I pitched it. And I realized, like, that is weird. No, like, lean into that. Like, you can't do a book that's all men in 2019. Like, that's just not going to happen. But if you lean into it and say, no, that's a weird thing. What's it like from somebody who's on the outside looking in? Mm-hmm. Suddenly there's like some real dramatic tension there. I think a lot of it was also autobiographical to some extent. Not that I grew up in a cult. I should be but I grew up in a particularly conservative upbringing, both politically and religiously. I grew up in a pretty strict Jewish household in the Midwest. And it wasn't until I left home that I realized, like, a lot of things that had been instilled in me when I was growing up were not quite as like set in stone as I had come to believe. And I think that's like a universal coming of age experience. You leave home and you get new information and you have to kind of recalibrate based on that. And you have to figure out, like, where do my values really lie? And, that means there's going to be some things you're going to have to take out, and there'll be some things that you replace it with. And you have to figure out, how do you set your own internal moral compass? And that really kind of, you put all that together, and that's before you get into kind of some of the prescient territory. I mean, I hadn't even thought, when I pitched this, it was well before the pandemic, but I signed my contract officially about a week before everything shut down. And so writing this during a pandemic, especially, in a period where, there's a lot of fetishizing of the military and survival preppers, sort of the culture of toxic masculinity, the kind of the rise of the evangelical megachurches, and kind of this looking down on critical thought. You put all that in a cauldron and you throw a couple of nukes at it, and suddenly Scout's Honor doesn't seem that far-fetched. So is really a combination of just, some of it being the right place, right time, and some of it just realizing that, there are things in my life that really kind of got filtered onto the story. And I think it makes it, don't get me wrong, post-apocalyptic Boy Scouts are cool, just on the face of it. But I think it gives a little bit of layer and a little bit of depth to a story like this.
Awesome. So have someone else saying hi in the chat there.
Yeah, hey, Justin. Yes, I'll absolutely make sure to talk some OC, no problem.
So following up with, where the idea came from and everything, were you ever a Boy Scout or a Cub Scout yourself?
My younger brothers were. And I think that also really informed the story, because I was the outsider looking in. I'm the oldest of four, like I was saying. And so I was like the crash test dummy baby, like my parents did not like do a whole lot of extracurriculars for me because they were still figuring out how to be parents. By the time my siblings came along, there's three of them, they outnumbered us. And so it was kind of like, okay, we're going to throw them as many extracurriculars as we can, just keep them busy. We're raising a puppy, and they say like a tired puppy is a well-behaved puppy. And I assumed my parents felt that way about their children. So, seeing my brothers and like taking them to their scout meetings and having some scout meetings at our place, for them on the inside, it's all about the camaraderie and the practical skills and, maybe a little bit of friendly rivalry, but, it's time with your boys. On the outside, though, you see the costumes and the rituals and the laws, and, you don't have to squint too hard for it to start looking like a cult. And that really that really, I think, affected things in a lot of ways, because, you know, one person's tradition is like another person's zealotry. And, you know,
absolutely.
And it's one of those things, anything that really kind of takes up that much space in your brain, that really helps you self-identify. You could say the same thing about comics, you know, or Magic the Gathering, or Dungeons and Dragons, you know, or video games or whatever, is that like, we're super well versed in this stuff, but, you know, an outsider would be like, oh, those comic book people are like cultists. And but, you know, at the same time, it can be a little bit of a culture shock when you find out that like nothing's ever going to be fully on the up and up, you know. And you look at even to take like real life religious things, you know, I was raised Jewish, you know, and so my spiritual journey when I left home was very different than that of my parents, and very different than that of their parents. Judaism as a religion is kind of built on literary analysis. You know, you got 5 different rabbis giving 10 different interpretations in the same passage. And then we leave all of this in the margins, all this apocryphal material. It's built for a wide spectrum of interpretation and practice. Whereas my partner was raised Catholic. And, you know, that you've got, you know, the doctrines, you know, the Pope says this, or the Vatican says this. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you know, you look at the priest abuse scandals, and I know my partner was one of many people who was just so disillusioned by that, saying, you know, how can I be a part of an organization that has swept this sort of stuff under the rug and has gone to this kind of lengths to sort of bury it? And I think that really, those two stories together really informed Kit, because she finds out that there's a secret dating all the way back to the Ranger Scouts formation. And it's going to make her question everything. It knocks her whole worldview off its axis. Yeah. And so she's going to have to find out, like, well, what are the parts of this religion that I believe in are worth keeping? You know, what are the positive elements here? And then what's the stuff that's just the toxic human institution that I have to sort of navigate through? And really kind of figuring out what's going to stay and what's going to go. And really kind of, it's all about her embracing her faith and her tradition on her own terms. And I think that's the sort of thing that I think it turns this book into something that's not preachy, but at the same time, like, it's anti-cult. I wouldn't say it's necessarily anti-faith or anti-religion. Yeah. So it's it's just been, it's certainly been an eye-opening book for me, for sure. I think it really kind of uncovered a lot of stuff that I hadn't really thought about, or hadn't at least overtly thought about. And it really kind of made me think a lot about, you know, my upbringing and my faith and my identity as a Jewish person. And, you know, how does that get filtered into my day-to-day life, in my ethics, in my values, and now in my art.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually, I spent time as a Cub Scout, as a Boy Scout, kind of dropped out of Boy Scouts after, I didn't go for Eagle. But so it's always interesting, you know, having that background and reading this and knowing, okay, that's where that came from.
Yeah.
That's where that came from. These are like on the cover, like the things, the commandments are all,
they're all based on Scout laws.
Right.
Yeah, that was a really fun part about this book, was the Boy Scouts as an organization, they have like a really rich iconography and a really deep history to them. And so for me, those are the things I tend to gravitate towards. You know, my first book was What If Calvin and Hobbes Grew Up in Sin City? That was Spencer and Long. So, you know, Bill Watterson's career, there's a lot to mine from there. Going to the chapel was Die Hard at a Wedding. There's so much imagery going into weddings. The OZ, you know, that's the Wizard of Oz mythology. Same thing for Scout's Honor. It's like, oh, I didn't have any issues of finding stuff. It was more of like, what can I afford to cut? Knowing that I only have 100 pages to tell this story. And but yeah, it was really fun because there's so much imagery to it that you can then kind of add meaning to it. You can sort of find the religion in the Ranger Scouts. So for anyone who's read our first issue, we actually had a list of Ranger Scout merit badges, which all exist, by the way. They are real. I
wanted to ask about those. Yeah.
Yes. So there are different giveaways. Put that in. It was super fun when Aftershock asked me to do that. I was like, this is such a fun way to world build, you know? And so things like the explosives merit badge ties it directly into their creation myth, where the new world was born in an explosion. And so they're obsessive about like blast wave radii and payload composition, because they know if you don't respect the bomb, you might be the thing that gets consumed next. And yeah, things like that, things like, you know, the actual Boy Scouts founder, and sort of recasting him as Dr. Jefferson Hancock, our sort of our prophet messiah figure, who, you know, he looms very large over Scouts Honor as a whole. You know, even down to just, you know, figuring out, well, what are the different skills, you know, of merit badges, you know, archery, explosives, tactical driving, what would you need in a post-apocalyptic setting? And yeah, we've been able to really like feed into that a lot in this series. And yeah, some more fun stuff to come on that score for sure.
Yeah, so in the first issue, you have them like joking around, like they throw a bomb, and he's like, "Explosives merit badge."
Yeah. It's funny because the SVP of marketing, Steve Rotterdam, from Aftershock, I've known him since I was at DC as well. He's another DC alum. And when they first greenlit the book, I saw him at Baltimore Comic-Con last year, and he ran up to me and he goes, "Okay, so when we do this book, you have to have merit badges, okay?" And I was like, already ahead of you, man. Like, that's going to be like a crucial part of the story. Yeah, it was definitely, I was glad that great minds thought alike in this regard. Because yeah, it's also just a super fun collectible. I mean, every single issue, I think it's the first issue, if you ordered 20 copies or more, your store would get merit badges. And every issue, issues 2 through 5, I think it's a 10 issue minimum order. But yeah, there are tons of stores out there who have Ranger Scout merit badges. And then there will be a few others. I know, I think I had heard that Comics Pro might have gotten a certain merit badge, or maybe that was being discussed. I don't know if it happened. And I know there was some talk about potentially doing one at conventions when conventions come back.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, those 14 merit badges, they all exist. I promise. I have one set here. But yeah, it's a really special kind of keepsake for a really special book.
That's awesome. My shop must not have ordered enough because no merit badges.
Oh man. Well, you know, tell your shop,
I haven't seen any either.
If they ordered more than 10 copies of issues 2 through 5 and they didn't get badges, hit up Aftershock, and they'll get you squared away.
Awesome. That actually covered a couple of our other questions right in there. Awesome. Yeah. No, that was perfect. I love the way that the story of all of that came out. That's great. Caroline, you got the next one?
Oh, you want to? Okay. Sorry. So the world of Scouts Honor is just like so widely developed. Like, y'all have so much backstory in it, and the whole post-apocalyptic setting it's really great in like my opinion, and I love post-apocalyptic stories. So I was wondering, like, did you develop the aesthetic and then develop the story, or was that something that you kind of like developed around the story?
Boy, that's a great question. You know, it's a little column A, a little column B. You know, for me, I'm always trying to do a lot of research and just figuring out like what's the iconography here, and then I can usually play off that. But at the same time, this was an interesting book because unlike most of my other projects where I've written like maybe one issue and an outline, and then, you know, I find an artist and we start it, you know, the thing kind of mutates a little bit as the artist comes in, as I'm doing my own scripting. This was a very different animal. You know, this is the first time I've ever had a creative team match made for me. So working with artist Luca Casalanguida, you know, I was familiar with Luca's work on James Bond over at Dynamite, and I had actually hit him up for a project years ago that the timing didn't work out. So I was thrilled when Christina Harrington, our editor, and Mike Martz brought up Luca, and I was like, yeah, he sounds awesome. And Luca really added his own spin on a lot of my scripts because I was far enough ahead. I'm pretty sure, you know, he was churning out an issue every 6 to 7 weeks. I was writing a script every like 2 to 3 weeks. So I was banking scripts well ahead. I think I was probably somewhere through issue 3 by the time he finished with issue 1. So there was a lot of sort of writing as nimbly as you can, or maybe saying editing really as nimbly as I can. Because, knowing like, okay, I write a script, but as the art comes in, I'm going to do what's called a lettering pass, which means just tweaking any sort of dialogue. If there's any curveballs in the art, trying to sort of accommodate for that. While also being cognizant that like Aftershock has deadlines, they have certain benchmarks that need to be hit at a certain time, and knowing like, okay, if there's something that needs to be tweaked, is it worth pulling Luca off of his fairly tight schedule? Or is it something that I can rewrite, or is it something that can be fixed in the coloring or lettering stages? So yeah, Luca really added, I think, a lot to the aesthetic of this book. Things like the Eagle's Nest, which is sort of the command center of the Ranger Scout compound. That building design was all Luca, and I was like, oh, that looks so cool. It's like awesome. Kind of menacing. We talked a lot about the initial character concepts for sure. Kit in particular, I was like, I'm thinking like an androgynous character who, kind of passes in this case. And this was sort of, I write a lot of ginger characters, and it's not because like I'm like half ginger and quarter Irish, but it's also because like it's a storytelling cheat. It means that no matter how far away they are in a panel, you see that little red hair and oh, that's that character. Awesome. And same thing with like Dez. I was kind of like, all right, let's do the man bun. Let's do, let's have him kind of be like the Loki to Kit's Thor a little bit. Whereas like characters like
fun comparison.
Yeah. Whereas like Scoutmaster Shepard, I feel like Luca really took the ball and ran with him. He's the cult leader. I had said sort of like, think of like a militarized Jesus figure. And I think Luca really, I think, kind of hit a home run with that character. But yeah, it's one of those experiences that this is one of the faster books that we've ever put together, or that I've ever put together. Usually I'm working with very new artists. And so, it usually takes them anywhere from 10 months to a year to get done a miniseries. Whereas Luca really churned through this book. We brought him on board, I want to say it was April of 2020, and he finished the book in November. So he was, really booking it. And the fact that the book looks so good, despite the fact that he was really like hauling ass, I'm very impressed with his work. I wish we got to talk more. Luca, he's based in Italy, and he does not speak English. So we were actually translating all of our scripts through his agent. And so that, I think, I always said it was like a learning curve, figuring out how to work with editors for the first time. But also it's working with editors, but also figuring out an actual language gap. And that also provided some fun opportunities to take different spins on the material. And it really, I think it kind of made me a more considerate and nimble writer. It just really taught me what kind of reference do I need to put in a script? What kind of information do I need to put down that doesn't bog things down, but still gets the point across? How do I measure twice so my artist only has to cut once? And I think Scouts Honor really kind of helped reinforce that for me in a big way.
Do they have like a Italian version of the Scouts?
I don't think so. Although interestingly enough, the Boy Scouts were actually they were a British thing before they were an American thing. But I don't, as far as I know, I don't think there's an Italian Boy Scouts. But I could be wrong on that one.
Interesting. So we got one more Scouts Honor focused question.
Yeah,
we've got a couple of questions in the chat. We'll go to, and then come back to a couple other things we want to ask you about. And I think half answered this question already, but Kit and Dez seem to, they're pretty lively characters. You can feel their emotions.
Sure.
Kind of talked about Kit, but was Dez modeled off of someone that that you were saying Kit kind of, parts of you are in there with Kit?
Yeah. there's certain times there's parts of me in all of the characters. I think, Dez is kind of my competitive streak. And I certainly have one. And I think that I've had friendships that have been certainly defined that way, of sort of, it's a friendly competition until the moment it's not. I feel like for me, the important part about Dez and, mild spoilers on this, if Kit's a woman navigating this like hyper masculine world of the Ranger Scouts, I thought, I wanted to have a character representing the LGBTQ experience, and Dez, when you kind of strip the whole story away, you strip away the post-apocalyptic thing and you strip away even the Boy Scout imagery. This is a book about a small, isolated conservative town. And Dez is kind of the son of the pasture, the closeted son of the pasture, I should say. And it always makes me feel sad writing. I always felt sad writing Dez, because he's a guy who he can't live his authentic life because he's got all these expectations on him. And he's got all this pressure from his father and his society. And that's tragic to me. And so, saying that he's the Loki to Kit's Thor, he's always a very sympathetic character to me. And I think his arc in many ways is just as important as Kit's. We won't see as much of Dez in issue 4, but issue 5, I think our final issue, I think I really like the way that we've wrapped his story up. I think it's something that I think is humane to the character. I'll be the first to say we're not doing like a bury your gaze thing in this book. Like that's like we're not doing that. And I think the way, just like Kit has to navigate a lot of things for her, Dez really has to as well. Living an authentic life is a struggle that I think a lot of people have. It can be a lifelong thing. And Dez is really going to come to a crossroads where it's sort of who he is versus what his father is expecting of him. There's going to come some conflict there. But I think that makes Kit and Dez's friendship really tragic, is that they're best friends who each have a very deep secret that's very emblematic of who they are. And they can't tell their best friend about it. I mean,
yeah.
And I think that lends a lot of creative, of dramatic sparks, of two people who have to have their guard up all the time. And what happens when their guard slips. Dez, he might be my favorite character in the book, to be honest.
Aww.
And I've loved every time I've written him. And I can say, having seen the pages for issue 5, very thrilled with how Luca really stuck the landing with his arc.
That's good to hear.
Definitely getting me excited for the end.
Yeah.
Let's take a couple questions from the chat, and then we'll come back. Let's see, what was the first one? So we have some Wizard of Oz and related questions.
Boy, such a tough question. So for those who aren't aware, I wrote a book that was on Kickstarter in the fall, and we'll be coming back relatively soon with our second issue called The OZ, which is kind of what if the Hurt Locker took place in the Wizard of Oz. And so that's why there's going to be a lot of Wizard of Oz related questions in this chat. It's not just because like I'm a super fan, it's funny because the OZ in a lot of ways was reclaiming some really early childhood memories. Calvin and Hobbes for Spencer and Locke. Like I grew up with that, and then revisiting it as an adult, I was like, oh, this was so ahead of its time. It was so trailblazing. Whereas the Wizard of Oz, you have the memories of the Judy Garland film, which almost everybody does. It's like cultural osmosis at this point. And I actually read a lot of the L. Frank Baum books in college for an adolescent lit class. But it was one of those things that I fell in love with the material the more I started remixing it. And so my favorite character in the book, I mean, I love writing Dorothy Gale, our new Dorothy. She is just such a fun character to play with. I think because she's cut from the same cloth as Detective Locke from Spencer and Locke. But if I have to be honest, it's the Tin Man. I think just seeing, he's the bruiser of the group. And even if you're taking the original like source material, he leads with his heart. He's the genuinely good guy out of the group. And so seeing the way that artist Ruben Rojas reimagined him for the OZ, I have a lot of positive memories associated with the character. I feel like that was sort of my love connection with Ruben. He did his pitch pages and they looked great, but then when he turned in that cover, I was like, that's an artist I'm going to be working with my whole career. The Tin Man's probably my favorite. But that said, I've grown up with Toto dogs my whole life, and actually, I'll say, to get in the weeds personally a little bit, we had a Toto dog named Holly, who she was my parents' dog, and we took her in her golden years, and I started writing the OZ about a month after we took her home, and I finished the OZ about 2 months after she passed. She passed from cancer just before the pandemic started. And so writing Toto really hit me, and it hit me where I lived. And the fact that I was sort of able to give my little dog a voice, in her own way, it did my heart a lot of good. And so we have a new little Toto dog now, our little pup Ruby. You might see her on my Twitter feed from time to time. But it is really hard to choose, because this series has been so much fun in being able to remix all these characters. And so I'm able to really like make all of these characters super fun. If you've ever played like Final Fantasy VII or Chrono Trigger, like they do like a lot of fun stuff with the archetypes. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge influence on the OZ. So don't make me choose between my babies, but if I have to.
So I'll put this up. There he
is right there on the bottom.
So
yeah, Ruben Rojas just drew the hell out of the Tin Man. But just wait, because issue 2 is coming on Kickstarter. As soon as we have a critical mass of pages, we'll be off to the races on that campaign. And we'll get to meet our new take on the Cowardly Lion. And he looks incredible. So excited for everybody to get to see that.
That's awesome. So we got another question about the OZ.
Yeah.
You were interviewing vets. So he wants to hear a little bit about your past news career.
Sure. So, it's funny. My aunt used to be a copy editor at the Washington Post. And I think that was like my first interaction with anybody who was working in journalism. And I kind of fell into it in college. I thought I wanted to do pre-law, realized that I'm not built to be a lawyer whatsoever. But I know how to write in a deadline. And so journalism kind of felt like the stable career. Which, looking back on it, oh, you naive child. So when the recession hit, and there weren't really any entertainment jobs, thankfully, I had also interned at a bunch of newsrooms. So I was able to parlay that. I was a beat reporter at the Berkshire Eagle in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. If you don't know where that is, it's the furthest western port of Massachusetts you can get before you hit New York State. And it's an interesting location because it's where a lot of very wealthy Northeasterners have their vacation homes, but it's also a former GE town that has never really bounced back economically. And so you have like abject poverty next to like stunning wealth, sometimes only within a couple of blocks of each other. And so that made for some very interesting demographics to cover, especially during the height of the recession. My first day was Martin Luther King Day 2009, so just before Barack Obama was inaugurated. And so you put all that together, and so I covered, like I said, I covered state politics and I covered crime. The crime beat was kind of split up amongst several of us. I was the night shift of the crime beat. And so sometimes that was like, there's a car accident, because again, it's Massachusetts, the winters, that stuff happens pretty regularly. Or there's power outages, especially in the more rural areas in the county. But there was also gangs, the Albany and Springfield gangs, the Crips, I believe it was, would kind of send their people to the Berkshires as almost like the finishing school, because like the police presence wasn't as big as it would be in an Albany or a Springfield, let alone like Boston. But by virtue of it being like it was a small daily newspaper, I was able to carve out different niches. And so what Justin was alluding to, I took it on myself. I covered the mental health beat, and I covered the local veterans beat. And so I remember I did a lot of interviews with returning veterans, and especially what was it like for them coming home, especially in an economically depressed area during an even more economically depressed time. And hearing a lot of people's stories, about just the sense of alienation coming home, of people just, it's hard to convey what it's like over there to somebody who has no concept whatsoever. And on top of that, what happens when, there's a very certain regimented routine over there. And then you kind of come back to the chaos and the noise of the way American society works. And, you take that into consideration. You take things like PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and losing friends. You put all that together, and it can be a really fraught return home. And I think that those stories really stood with me. I think they really informed everything I've written since. I tend to talk about trauma a lot in my work. I think that's an ongoing theme. And I think those interviews that I did really kind of set me on that path. I think you never really know somebody until you kind of know like the worst moments of their life. Conversely, you can also say the best moments of their life, or the moments in their life that are the most redemptive. I think that's kind of a mix of the two. But that certainly was a big influence on the OZ, because recasting Dorothy Gale as a soldier returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and kind of not knowing how to cope. She's taking care of her grandmother, the original Dorothy from the original Wizard of Oz, who now has Alzheimer's, and she's talking about, oh, has anybody fed Toto? And our Dorothy has to be like, Toto passed like a long time ago, Grandma. Like, let's get you your pills. And at the same time, what happens to somebody who's hyper aware all the time, and your grandma knocks a bowl onto the kitchen floor? What does that do to you? What happens to somebody when they're taking to alcohol to self-medicate for the nerves? What happens to somebody when they when in their heart of hearts they're like, you know what? I remember what it was like falling asleep to the noise of a helicopter. That's how I sleep. There's no real, it's a thorny question. I had somebody email me the other day kind of asking like, what are the politics of the OZ? And I think for me, I'm always trying to focus on like the human story here. Dorothy saw some stuff over there, and there was a lot of human ruin in their wake on both sides, and sort of her kind of figuring out like, well, what was the meaning there? Was there any meaning there? And then seeing the Land of Oz as maybe a second chance to get things right. I don't think there's any really one holistic way of telling a war story in this way, but this is the way that I'm able to tell it, just based on the people that I've spoken with. And I'm hoping that, that has sort of been able to do their experience justice, because anytime I write a book, the whole mission is first and foremost, I don't want to trivialize anybody's life. I don't want to make fun of it. Yeah. I don't want to punch down. I think when you first think of like, how do I do this respectfully, that really kind of sets the tone for the rest of the series going forward. How am I doing? Staying hydrated? Not nearly enough. I constantly have to remind myself. No, I'm doing, all things considered, it's been a crazy year. I think it's been a crazy year for all of us. and the fact that I'm sitting here talking about a book, that is hugely lucky. The fact that my partner and I, we've stayed healthy. My family has stayed healthy. My parents are both vaccinated. I'm supposed to be getting vaccinated soon.
Awesome.
You can't ask for anything more. But thank you for asking. And yes, I need to keep
and we got one more that was a question we also had. So after
the boss has talked to me about Scouts Honor Volume 2 yet.
Arc. Are we seeing something else in the world of Scouts Honor?
I don't know.
Related to these characters,
Girl Scout cult, Boy Scout cult.
Yeah, I always write with another idea in my back pocket, no matter what. Just because, exactly for that reason, in case the demand is there, in case Aftershock wants more, in case the readership wants more, in case Luca is around and wants more. We haven't said anything yet about it. That is, there has not been a discussion yet about a volume 2. As somebody who has written sequels, writing sequels is really hard. I'm in the middle of writing Spencer and Locke Volume 3, and it's very challenging. I never want to overstay my welcome in a book. That's sort of my number one concern, and that's why I tend to write fairly tight. And people always say, "Oh, I would have loved another issue," and I'm like, "I would have died." I say never say never. I have ideas, but at the same time, as a creator, I know I have a finite amount of books in me, and so my mentality, especially having done a sequel to Spencer and Locke and working on another one, killing myself to do so, is that I would much rather I get restless. I'd love to just kind of jump from different projects and say, oh, well, hey, if you like Scouts Honor, what's a better use of the time doing a Scouts Honor 2, or being hey, you should really read the OZ. But my thinking is, look, if Aftershock is interested, I'm always interested. I love working with them. They're actually looking at some other concepts for me right now, so fingers crossed that they dig those. So no plans yet, but never say never.
Awesome. So we got a question about, do you listen to music as you write? And if so, what are you listening to?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. It depends. It changes from project to project for sure. It's always based on the tone, so for example, when I was writing, Going to the Chapel, I did a lot of old-timey sounding stuff, James Brown, The Night Has a Thousand Eyes, just kind of the old fashioned music. Whereas with Spencer and Locke, there was a lot of hip hop. There was a lot of there was a song from the movie Logan, and I'm trying to remember what it was. It's called Way Down We Go. That was it. It's sort of a very sad kind of ballad. That was the big song for Volume 2. Writing the scripts for Grand Theft Astro, of course, a lot of songs from the Fast and the Furious, that those were, hugely important for that. I'm trying to remember what I was listening to when I wrote Scouts Honor. I feel like I was listening to a lot of Run the Jewels, when I was watching that. For me, the way that I tend to do it is I find one song that really kind of keys into the energy I'm feeling and kind of generates images, and then I just put that on repeat, and I will probably listen to that same song for a week while I'm just writing, while I'm writing out notes. Google Docs is my friend. I will often write 8 different versions of the same script because I'm I don't know how I feel about this scene. All right, Control A, copy. Let's do another document. We'll just try it, see how it goes. But yeah, I feel like I have to listen to music. I can tell you, for example, the Neighbors soundtrack. I was listening to that for a comedy outline that I was working on recently. So it's very, there's no rhyme or reason for it. It's kind of the subconscious wants what it wants. But yeah, if I ever find a song that I'm really grooving on, that usually stays in rotation until at least an issue script is done.
Awesome.
So, what can you tell us about issue 4 without spoiling anything? It's coming out next week.
Boy,
not much.
Lost in the Wilderness in more ways than one. That is, you know, for me, the way that I tend to do second to last issues, and this is a very weird way that I have a process for doing second to last issues. But I always consider that, where's the metaphor? What's the central metaphor of the book? So for Spencer and Locke, it was, you know, this is about a cop who's imagined his own partner and best friend. So my second to last issue is like, what happens when his imagination like finally runs away with him? And going to the chapel, you know, my second to last issue, you know, this bride becomes the ringleader of her own hostage situation to get out of her own wedding because she has cold feet. And so her family tries to rescue her in the second to last issue, and they've basically weaponized the wedding registry. You know, so Scouts Honor in this case, you know, the Badlands, the wilderness, that is like the real threat here. And, you know, it's very binary, you know, it's you survive or you don't. And what happens to a scout when she doesn't believe anymore? So I feel like it might be my favorite issue out of all of them. Don't get me wrong. Issue 5 has some moments that I love that are some of my favorite of the series, but as a whole, issue 4 is my favorite. It's certainly sort of the biggest spiritual exploration in the series, but I think it's one that Kit as a character has earned, and very excited. But if you're not into that, they also we have giant radioactive spiders. So, and let me tell you,
something for everyone thrown in.
Yeah.
Seeing, you know, Andy Clark does the covers for our series, and he and Jose Villarrubia and colors have done such a terrific job with all of our covers. But there is seeing the stylistic difference in our giant spider monster from Andy to Luca. It's wild. You know, it's the same monster, but seeing the way that Luca tackles it, it's gnarly. I love it. So yeah, really fun issue, and I can't wait for people to read it. Coming out in stores this Wednesday.
Yes. Wednesday, April 14th. So be sure to pick it up from your LCS. So I know you kind of hinted that you've got some projects coming up. Are there any that you've announced that you're able to talk about, or are they all kind of under wraps right now?
No, I can talk a little bit. So, you know, I'm working on Spencer and Locke 3. That's been kind of long in the works, and anybody who's complaining about the length between volume 2 and volume 3, that's 100% my fault. I always tell people the difference between volume 2 and volume 3. I didn't have any other projects on the docket when I wrote volume 2. I wrote volume 1. People liked it, and I said, "Oh, okay. I guess I'm a comics writer now." And that was sort of the thing I wrote immediately thereafter. I've written, I think, like 7 books since then. So I've had to kind of grow into it a little bit. Also, you know, it's intimidating trying to live up to the legacy of Bill Watterson, for sure. And but for volume 3, we're doing a Garfield themed serial killer picking off the Peanuts gang. And so that's like climbing Everest 3 times.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so I want to make sure that like we do this one right. You know, this is going to be our final arc. It's going to be kind of the exclamation point at the end of the sentence that is Spencer and Locke. We've been building up to it for a long time. All the pieces are there. It's just kind of really hunkering down and getting that puzzle together. But there's some really fun stuff we have planned, and the team's coming back. Artist George Santiago Jr., colors Jason Smith. We're all back for more. So I'm very excited about that. Grand Theft Astro is slowly but surely coming together. We announced that a couple years back at San Diego Comic-Con through Top Cow. That story is like, what if the Fast and the Furious met Back to the Future in space?
Fun.
Yeah. Hakeem Hermes Henriksen is the fastest star chaser in the galaxy, racing for power, prestige, and pink slips. However, he activates an experimental quantum supercharger during a race and accidentally tears open a wormhole 7 years into the future. Dang. And so he's going to have to contend with a universe that has long since left him in the dust. And so he's going to embark on a faster-than-light heist with his formerly younger brother. in order to steal some tech that might bring him back home. So I'm super thrilled. That series is written. We're just slowly but surely kind of getting the art together. And then we can sort of announce when that can be on the schedule once we get like a critical mass of pages. The OZ is coming back. Artist Ruben Rojas is killing it on his pages. I'm hoping that we'll be back on Kickstarter in June. He's drawing pages. There was some COVID related delays. So we're back on the tracks now for that. And I'm also moving. So like, I'm going to be a little out of pocket, later this month. So we're hoping June we'll be back, on there. It's a little longer than I would have liked, but, the series is written and Ruben's artwork is so good. As we get to finally meet, the Cowardly Lion. And like Dorothy, the definition of bravery is very different when you're just fighting for yourself. But as the lion is going to be the first to attest, what happens when you're the king of the animal kingdom and you have to fight for more than just yourself? The calculus of courage changes dramatically. So I'm very excited about that. And then, I'm working on a few other things that haven't been announced yet. Some of them don't have homes, but I've written a sci-fi YA adventure that I'm very excited to finally kind of get the ball rolling on. Awesome. It's when it's announced, you all see why it's near and dear to my heart. Working on my first horror book. We're getting some pages together on that. A comedy that I'm sort of waiting to hear back on from some places, and a few other things that are on the docket. I've got a laundry list a mile wide of things to do. But that's the great thing about comics is they never want to, I don't have to be pigeonholed in any one genre. And so I like kind of bouncing around from project to project and, keeping readers and publishers alike on their toes.
Yeah, no, that's awesome that you have this many different genres that you're working on. And it's not just, like you said, you're not pigeonholed into, it has to be post-apocalyptic or crime or.
Yeah. It's I get restless easily. And so every time I finish a book, it's like, it's like half running a marathon and half like binge eating one food. And by the time you're done, you're like, oh man, like, I need to do something completely different. And sometimes you find out that like, there are things that, don't get me wrong, I love all of my books, it'd be hard to not put all this time into it and not like them. But I'm aware of their flaws. And so every time I finish a book, I say, what's the thing that I screwed up here? Or what's the thing that I could have done better? And that's usually becomes the thing that I then like tackle really hard in the next book. Spencer and Locke was a very small cast. And for a lot of reasons, it wasn't as diverse as I wanted it to be. And that was because I didn't want to lean into stereotyping, with the subject matter, And so the next book I did, Go Into the Chapel, I was like, okay, this has got 15 speaking roles and it's led by a woman and 2 romantic leads that are both men of color. I was like, that's really important to me. And so every time I do a book, those are questions and considerations I'm taking into mind. And I think it keeps me limber. I think it makes my work a little unexpected. And, I want to be Baskin Robbins, I want to be the guy at the convention who's got 31 flavors, something for everybody, because
that's awesome.
I want to invite more people to the table. We don't have a comics industry if we don't cater to as many people as we can. And I want to do my part as an ambassador to the industry to make sure that I have something for everyone.
Nice.
Awesome.
Well, speaking of cons, are you going to be trying to go to any when they come back this year?
Yeah, I was a big con warrior before the pandemic. I was scheduled, I think, for 15 shows in 2020, and I only got to do 2. Wow. I'm excited to come back to doing shotos. Hopefully maybe with a little bit more of like a sane frequency than what I was doing before. But with Going to the Chapel, having a trade out, that the trade had just dropped before the pandemic, with Scouts Honor having a trade coming out in September, with the OZ hopefully having a collection by 2022. I'm going to be doubling my books. And I'm excited to do shows. I'm excited to go back to Denver. I'm excited to do Baltimore. Excited to hopefully get to do New York and San Diego again. I miss meeting readers, and cons are that's where we get to see what's really affecting people. And so I miss cons so much, and I can't wait to come back.
Yeah.
Keeping my fingers crossed for Baltimore because that's
Yes.
closest one to me.
If that's your home show, Baltimore has been a very good show for me. As a 3-time Ringo Award nominee, I will never miss Baltimore as long as they'll have me. And Baltimore is a show. If they're watching, they have been very good to me. They let my mother sneak up on me during the my first Ringo Awards. They got her a ticket and she flew in from Missouri to surprise me. So the Baltimore is one of my favorite shows. And I'll be going there as long as I have a pulse.
Awesome.
That is awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with other upcoming projects and things that we haven't even covered?
Yeah.
I know that it's such a broad,
vaguest question.
It's funny. I mean, the thing about comics in particular, and it's something that really kind of goes counter to me as a person, because I'm a control freak. I fully admit it, and anybody I've ever collaborated with would probably be the first to say it. Is that I working as a journalist and somebody who's worked as an editor, like you try to keep the train on the tracks, you try to keep the car within the guardrails. But you ever heard the phrase, you make plans and the universe laughs? Mm-hmm. That's comics. And Scout's Honor is a really good, representation of that. That was the concept I had just come up with like 2 weeks prior, as opposed to all these gestating projects, some of which still have not, seen the light of day. And, it just goes to show you there's only so much in your control. And so I'm always kind of half like gritting my teeth, half being very excited. What's tomorrow going to hold? Both for my career in the microcosm, but also the comics industry in general. I mean, anybody who's been reading any sort of comics news this week, like there's been a lot of crazy shakeups lately. Just read the Hollywood Reporter. And so, that's part of what makes it fun. But, at the same time, you want to make sure that this is an industry that stays inclusive and open and welcoming to new readers. So yeah, I just want to do my part. I want to get my reps in. People ask me a lot if I want to do like licensed books, and my answer is always, sure, I'd love to. And if they want me, they know where to find me. But until then, I don't want to be the guy who thinks he can run before he can walk. And I'm having the time of my life, telling my own stories, calling my own shots. And if somebody wants me to write, Shazam or Doctor Strange or Exiles or my personal white whale, Captain Planet, I'm here. But otherwise, I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to chat with me. I want to thank everybody who's been watching the show and been giving me these amazing questions, and all the readers out there. It is, as somebody who's written on the internet for a long time, you have this sense of like, is this thing on? Can anybody hear me? Mm-hmm. And the fact that like strangers are responding to the work, I feel like the universe is like playing a prank. Like is Ashton Kutcher in the closet somewhere? Am I about to get punked? And so I just, even the most frustrating comics days, and believe me, there are plenty, I go to bed every night saying this is the best job in the world, and I'm so privileged and lucky and grateful to be here, and it's one reader at a time. So thank you guys. And anybody who wants to, follow me online, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at PeposeD. It's right here in the name here. It's my last name, first initial, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews, or visit my website at davidpepose.com.
I did put, you have like a link tree with a bunch of links in it. I
Yes.
put that in the description.
Nice.
I put your Twitter.
Thank you.
For some reason, I knew you were on Instagram, but then I couldn't find
I'm barely on it. I need to be better.
I kept searching, and I'm like, I can't find it. What is going on?
There's something going on with my Instagram where like, I don't know if it's because I'm logging in on a desktop sometimes, but half the time it's like, oh, we've frozen your account because of like weird activity. And I'm like, I don't know what that means because I'm never on Instagram, but I do exist on Instagram, PeposeD. And if you can't find it, that means that Instagram probably flagged my account again, and I'll have to figure that out.
The weird activity was you weren't doing anything.
Yes, I'm not on this enough to do any weird activity, but I will get better about it. Hit me up when you come into Denver, and I'll give you some recommendations. I love Denver. Denver is one of my favorite shows. It's one of my top selling shows, and I'm so excited to come back. I'll probably be doing the 2022 show. Yes, so I hope you come and visit me at Denver next year and put a face to the name. Thank you, Lewis. That's so kind of you to say. Thank you, guys.
Lewis is a great guy. So, yeah, like you said, thank you to the chat for hanging out with us tonight.
And thank you for hanging out, showing up.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me and for taking the time, just doing everything you've been doing to support Scouts Honor. It means the world. And I'm just so glad that you guys have responded to the book the same way that I have. So thank you guys so much for having me.
Of course.
Love it.
With that, we'll say goodnight to everybody in the chat, and we'll see you guys next time.